Greetings, comrades. I am Raquel Castillo, National Coordinator of Laban ng Masa or People's Fight, a coalition of Philippine left political forces, organizations, and progressive individuals with a socialist direction. I will be moderating this session of the second day of Socialism 2021. Socialism 2021 is part of a series of biannual conferences organized by left parties in Southeast Asia. So this year, Socialism 2021 has the theme Overcoming the Multiple Crises of Capitalism. And it is jointly organized by Parti Socialist Malaysia or PSM, Socialist Workers Thailand, Partido Lakas ng Masa or PLM in the Philippines, Socialist Alliance Australia, Partai Rakyat Pekerja or PRM in Indonesia, Kesatuan Perjuangan Rakyat or KPR in Indonesia. This session today, on the second day, it has a topic on capitalism and the global economic crisis. People versus profit. We are aiming to analyze and discuss world capitalism's generalized crisis due to the constant overproduction of commodities with low profitability. This circumstance is systematically worsened by a pandemic which materially induces a wide range of crisis conditions and junctures that directly impact the global economy and thus primarily generates universal economic precarity for the international proletarian class. So in a world being overrun by global capitalist finance and financialization, digitalization, and false corporate climate solutions where big pharma, big tech, and the gig economy are raking in humongous profits, despite a supposed global recession, working people and communities more than ever need to engender a culture of solidarity and resistance to face these onslaughts. And so we ask ourselves, what are the possible socialist ways forward for the working class forces under the present day global economic order? Or should we say disorder? Before we begin, let us go through a number of house rules, being comrades and all. So, first, all participants are requested to respect differences in views and opinions. Please post questions as we go along. You will be having questions from our panelists, and post them in the Q&A box. It's down there below. You will see a Q&A. So there's an icon there. And please do it in short and specific manner addressed to the respective panelists that you want your response from. The Q&A is hopefully, it's not for debates, please, no? But for questions only, and only if there is time, we'll be entertaining perhaps one or two questions directly from people who wish to ask them in the open mic. But if there's no time, we'll just be taking up those that you post in the Q&A box. But to give ample time for each of the panelists to give their talk and enough time for the open discussion or open forum, we request the speakers be mindful of the time allotted to them because we only have less than 2 hours now, no? 1 hour, 45 minutes in this session. And we are comrades and we accord to each other due respect. So we cannot therefore tolerate any derogatory remarks, sexist or vulgar postings in the chat. And we're sorry, but organizers will have to remove such participants if that happens. So we're hoping nothing like that happens. So to begin our panel discussion, we are privileged to have with us today in our panel Dr. Rene Ofreneo from Philippines, Sivarajan Arumugam from Malaysia, and Lek Pachani from Thailand. So I will start now with the first panelist. Dr. Rene E. Ofreneo is a professor emeritus of the University of the Philippines. He served as dean 3 times in the School of Labor and Industrial Relations. And Dr. Ofreneo also served as Undersecretary for Labor Relations of the Department of Labor and Employment in the Philippines in 1997 to 1998 at the height of the Asian financial crisis. During his stint as Undersecretary, he personally handled and settled a dozen strikes and approved the registration of around 160 new unions. Dr. Ofreneo is currently president of the Freedom from Debt Coalition, or FDC, and also the Integrated Rural Development Foundation, or IRDF. And the second panelist we have, okay, thank you. The second panelist.
Ano kaya di ako mag-share ng slide?
Dr. Rene, we will, I'm introducing first all the 3 panelists, okay, and then I'll get back to you. The next panelist will be Sivarajan Arumugan, is the current Secretary General of Parti Socialist Malaysia, or PSM, since 2015. He served as secretary for Dr. Nasir Hashim when he was the state assemblyman for Kota Damansara. And Sivarajan also served as councillor for Shah Alam City Council from 2008 to 2013. Sivarajan was one of PSM's founding members in 1998 and was also a founding member of Community Development Center, or CDC, in 1992, which is a grassroots group working with plantation workers, factory workers, urban pioneers, and Orang Asli. He was also a coordinator of the Coalition of Urban Pioneers under Jaringan Rakyat Tertindas Malaysia, or JERIP. And the third panelist in this discussion this morning will be Lek Pachani. She has been a member of Socialist Workers Thailand since 2003 to promote workers' democracy and socialism. She has been a labor rights activist from her start with the Thai labor campaign in 2009 and is now an independent researcher and journalist involved in labor networks and pro-democracy activist networks in Thailand and Asia. She has researched, translated, published pieces on Thai political and economic development, socialism, women's rights, formal workers' conditions of employment, and struggles via a variety of different digital and print media. She is co-founder of Workers' Union in Thailand during the student uprising amidst the COVID-19 outbreak. So let us start. I will give you now Dr. Rene Ofreneo to share his talk.
Hello, good morning. As you can see, I need a haircut, but I'm very pleased to be in this conference and be with comrades from different countries in Asia. Ma'am Raquel, how do I share my presentation?
Do the technical
Dr. Rene, you can click the share screen button below.
Okay. So if you're going to be the one sharing, Serene.
Okay.
Rene, you will be sharing. So click on the share screen below. on the screen?
Wait. No, but you see,
Hmm?
there's something wrong with my. When I go to my PowerPoint, the screen for the Zoom is reduced to 1/2, and I don't see the pointer on screen sharing.
Okay.
Wait.
Maybe Navin?
Wait. Now I see. Share screen now.
Okay. So bear with us. Not everybody is, you know.
Can you see it now?
Yes. Yes, you do. Thank you.
Okay.
Here. You just have to make it full screen, maybe.
How? The Carabao.
Click on slideshow sa taas. I don't know if you have it down also.
It's not responding, but maybe you can read this already. It's not I can proceed already.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning again, everyone, and I'm very pleased to join this conference. I have a very short PowerPoint presentation focusing on the topic given is crisis of global capitalism. So I tried to come up with a brief historical outline of what's going on in Asia and in the world under global capitalism. So let me start with the situation 3 decades ago. And you see, 3 decades ago, in the early 1990s, global capitalism was declaring victory. Western media was celebrating the triumph of capitalism worldwide, and they came up. And then, in particular, a researcher from Rand Corporation all of a sudden became a celebrity overnight. His name is Francis Fukuyama. He wrote a book, End of History. And the thesis of that book is that free market economies, together with Western liberal democracies, they now constitute the new global order. So this is the beginning of what they call as the new, of the beginning of history. But as a background there, in the early 1990s, everybody was proclaiming it's the end of Cold War. You have the fall of Berlin Wall, 1989, the collapse of the USSR and the Comecon countries of Eastern Europe, China integrated in the world market, especially in the global value chains of multinationals. Vietnam tried to follow China with its doi moi policy, and neoliberalism or Washington consensus was on a roll. So it was a unipolar capitalist world in the 1990s, of course, with United States on top. Next. But what do we see today? It is a very different world today. Last year, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres gave a Mandela lecture in New York, and he said the world is now at an inflection point. It's buffeted by multi-sided multiple crises. In particular, you have 4 pandemics, all of which are posing existential threats to humanity. You have the COVID-19 pandemic, you have the climate emergency, you have the debt economic crisis, and social economic inequality. I think most of us here in this conference are familiar with these pandemics, but they are all they all go together. So it's a multiple crisis. These are the 4 horsemen galloping around the world, around Asia Pacific, and we hear their thunderous galloping sounds everywhere. So these are the four horsemen. Now, these pandemics, these are all expressions of the overall crisis of global capitalism. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed that the health sector, not only of developing countries, but even of developed countries, are generally unprepared and unable to control the pandemic. This is partly or largely due to present neoliberal obsession with privatization, with the commercialization and commodification of health service. And you can see this is also reflected in the quarrel about vaccine nationalism, which the big pharma is using to control the distribution and costing of vaccine in order to add more profits. So we saw that under this Forbes list, some of the Pfizer executives all of a sudden are on top of the list of the richest in the world. Climate emergency. This is rooted, of course, in the colonial, in our history, when colonizers transformed the peripheral countries into hewers of wood, carriers of water, but it is continued. And even after independence of some countries, neo-colonial, so you have this rape of resources is continuing. Our friends from Latin America came up with the term extravism, extraction. And then you have also this one-sided worship of the market at the expense of the environment. And that's why it's so difficult to phase out this coal, oil, gas, despite the science, because those who control this, the power plants are dependent on this dirty fuel, and they don't want to they don't want to lose profits. So, and then you have the debt economic crisis. Debt is surging everywhere. And for the first time in the history of the world, almost all countries are heavily in debt. And yet the group of 20 countries seem to be unmindful about this. And then, but they have not come up with any solution on the way out. And I believe that this debt the debt crisis will deepen in the years to come, and some countries will be declared bankrupt. Now, global value chains, which is at the center of Factory Asia. I think in our conference, I think I saw the name of Fami. He has produced book on Factory Asia. You see, the Asia was declared the center of industrial production, but mainly because of the global value chain or the chain of factories outsourced by multinational companies. But this is fracturing. And yet the governments, many governments are still gearing their economies to welcome foreign investors on GBCs without analyzing what's happening and what will be the outcome tomorrow, and to jobs and factories. They have this program of just trade and investment liberalization. The world and the economic landscape has changed and is changing. And then, of course, all of these leading to socio-economic inequality surging. And along with the inequality, you have surge in poverty, surge in hunger, because jobs and livelihoods are flattened. And yet governments are scrimping on social protection, austerity in social protection, and yet spending on saving big companies. So to summarize, Trade unions have been raising this since the 1990s. There's a global race to the bottom, and it's happening. But this race to the bottom, it has become clearer under the present situation. This is at the roots of the global capitalist crisis that we are witnessing. We have 1980s to 2010s, 4 decades of neoliberalism, with governments retreating or giving way to ascendancy of multinationals and foreign investment. And this leads to a contradiction, surge in global production, as we have seen in the case of Factory Asia, and limited income share of workers and farmers who produce those products being circulated by capitalist commerce. And then related to the limited share, you have the rise of labor precarity everywhere, spread of informal work. And so overall, this race to the bottom leads to what we call as crisis of overproduction and crisis of underconsumption. But a few multinationals, they get extra profits out of the situation, but instead of investing those extra profits for productive undertaking, they go to finance. So you have what we call, what Raquel mentioned earlier, financialization. And then sometimes this financialization even becomes very unproductive because they go into speculation, stock market, speculation on rise and fall of land market prices. And so we saw this was clearly shown in the 2000, in the case of Asia, 1997, 98 Asian financial crisis. In the case of America and Europe, you have the 2008-2010 global financial crisis. But what's really happening? You have all these crises recurring, but I think it's recurring in a increasingly becoming more and more serious each time. So how will this multiple crisis end? Well, I'm sorry, I'm not Nostradamus. It's difficult to answer. But what is clear, this crisis will linger for years and will spawn social and economic tension everywhere. So these are already happening. On COVID, pandemic is likely to last at least 5 years, for this is the life cycle of infectious viruses. It is likely to bring new variants. Now the latest is Omicron, or even trigger new viruses. One global solution is health for one, health for all, or whole of society, whole of humanity approach. But this is not happening due to inequalities among countries and peoples, vaccine nationalism by the big pharma, misgovernance by some governments of the health sector. I know that the 4 most populous countries in Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, India, Bangladesh, they have top-down militaristic approach. And then, of course, non-spending on people's needs. So how will the crisis end? On the climate emergency, to a certain extent, this teenager by the name of Greta Thunberg from Sweden is right. What happened in Glasgow this November is still blah, blah, blah. Rich countries hesitant to contribute to climate finance. They're supposed to pool resources and come up with this $100 billion a year common fund to help developing countries cope with climate emergency. Nothing happening. And they're hesitant to withdraw from dirty fuel, especially China and India. And we know the debate in Glasgow, China and India opposing this commitment to phase out coal. They agreed only to phasing down, meaning in accordance to well, to their schedule, hesitant to overhaul infrastructures and industries in a radical green way. And that's why I have written a number of articles on how hesitant is Asian Development Bank on phasing out coal despite its commitment on paper to go greener. So on the other hand, many governments in developing countries are also not forward-looking and reform-oriented. So what's happening? I am afraid if there are no bold measures or reforms by countries, especially the big polluters and the big the developed countries, the world is slowly heading towards climate Armageddon. And then third, on that economic crisis, the world now, the entire world is now wallowing in debt, both developed and developing. But pathway out of debt is still neoliberal, despite pronouncement that neoliberalism is dead. And so the solution is more liberalization, more deregulation, more privatization. Can you imagine? Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, all of a sudden coming up with similar proposal to reduce taxes for corporations, almost one common formula. And I do not understand, because at this time what you need is getting resources from the rich corporation so that you can cover expenditures on social protection. Global value chain is fracturing due to Industry 4.0, this industrial revolution, trade conflicts. You have the US-China trade conflict continuing, Japan-South Korea conflict ongoing, although below the world media radar, and there are other conflicts. And then you have climate disruptions, and yet governments everywhere still rolling the red carpet for global value chain investors, as if it's still the same system. This GBC, it has changed already. The landscape has changed. Then race to the bottom happening at global, regional, national levels. So therefore, what's happening is there's no end to contradictions and people's miseries. Finally, I think I need not expound this social economic inequality is deepening. It's deepening because unemployment is deepening, sometimes in the form of underemployment, hidden employment, unemployment, poverty, hunger, surging everywhere. World Bank and IDB, they're just content on focusing on their favorite program, distributing conditional cash transfer arms, instead of addressing giving attention to serious solutions such as asset reform, taxation of the wealth, and so on. So, what are the solutions? I am afraid our conference should discuss the solutions. Everywhere I see social movements are, they're grappling with the issue of what is the way out. As a researcher, let me share some reflections I have. I think I summarize this to 4S. One is socialize the solution, meaning solutions should be product of societal-wide consultation and implementation. You see, these authoritarian governments, usually their solutions emanate only from the autocrats together with their technocrats, who are usually neoliberal. Second, it's important that the people are able to reclaim their sovereign right to determine economic and social policies. Under neoliberalism, many countries, especially my country, have lost the sovereign right to determine our development priorities from 1980s to the present. whether it's Marcos, whether it's Yellow Revolution government, it's a one continuum. And the IMF World Bank Group is there. In the past, they have these formal conditionalities written in the so-called letters of intent. Today, they don't have to dictate those conditionalities because the technocrats that they have trained are all managing the economic clusters of the government. Third, sustainability should be the overall guide in crafting and planning policies. Under the UN in 2015, together with the Paris Agreement on climate change, the world adopted the 17 sustainable development goals. They are a good starting point. But look, it seems to me that nobody is giving serious attention to the implementation of these 17 SDGs. In 2019, before COVID, UN ESCAP, the Asia Commission, gave a failing grade to all countries in Asia for failing to meet the SDG targets. And we are just a few years before the deadline of 2030. Under COVID, 2020 and 2021, our scorecard is even worse. So sustainability in terms of environment, sustainability in terms of decent jobs, sustainability socially. You just read the 17 SDGs. And fourth and last, solidarity. This is a very good guiding principle as far as I'm concerned. Solidarity of the oppressed. COVID shows the survival of the poor in many poor communities have shown the strength of solidarity. Solidarity, power unleashed by the solidarity of the community, national, regional, and global at the global level can really change the course of history. And I believe this gathering is what this is all about, is strengthening our solidarity in Asia. And so, finally, my dear friends, dear comrades, let me conclude by quoting Gramsci. The old world is dying, and the new one is struggling to be born. Now is the time for workers to unite, fight, and win. Apology to Antonio Gramsci. Thank you. Mabuhay.
Thank you so much, Karane. So very quickly now, let us go to Srivarajan. Srivarajan.
Okay, thank you, comrade moderator. I'll just share my screen in a while. Can you all see the screen? You all can see the screen, right? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like to talk about will be also a follow-up from what Doctor has been also speaking about. I like to actually look at the character of capitalism itself and why, as an economic system, it is completely incapable of handling and overcoming crises that we have today. Now, we know that capitalism, some people say capitalism is in crisis. Some people say that capitalism is the crisis itself. But I like to show that why capitalism itself sort of works against itself in order to handle whatever crisis. And especially now, it completely falls apart in the face of the global pandemic that we are facing today, COVID-19. One aspect is that in terms of how the businesses operate, we can find that when there's a standstill in economic activities caused by lockdowns and during the pandemic, has caused many businesses to go bankrupt. Now, this is made worse by even stable businesses which were not affected by the pandemic, get overly cautious. So they hold back investments, they don't do any kind of capital expenditure. And what happens is that such attitudes have worsened the situation. So this is the character of investment, this is the character of capitalists themselves, when even though the majority of other small businesses get affected, even the bigger ones, they sort of hold back and they sort of drive down the economy much more further. When even corporations which are not directly impacted by the pandemic also stop investing, and thus they further push the economy downwards. Now, this is one character, like I say, is self-defeating and it really does not help. And that is a problem of capitalism. The second issue, I think, which Doctor has also mentioned is regarding the global supply chain. Now, we know that capitalism has thrived all this while on globalization and the expansion of the global supply chain. With the advancement of IT and logistics services, production was organized throughout the world, accumulating profits for corporations in the developed world. The global supply chain or value chains were set up to exploit the lower unit labor costs in the poorer countries and the global south. But unfortunately, what has happened today is that this very efficient mode of production suffered a great backlash when lockdowns and border closure were implemented. Now, this we can say caused the first global supply chain crisis, where tensions arose when the global supply chain, when it was revived, even though during the recovery period, they simply could not meet the increasing number of orders when inventories were declining. In a report by the World Economic Forum, it declared that more than 90% of the Fortune 1000 multinational companies, corporations, had their tier 1 or tier 2 supplier, that means along the chain, affected by the virus. So this sort of disrupts the whole supply chain. And most corporations had no emergency plan to deal with the multiple breaks in their supply chain. Now, this also causes not only a problem of the supply, but also devaluation in terms of when devaluation of the items, not because there is no demand, but basically because when products, they cannot be sold in time. The other problem I think we are facing today, in fact, also in Malaysia, is that when things begin to recover and there is opening up of borders, goods are able to be supplied again from one country to another, but the cost has increased. The cost of logistics, the cost of transport has increased drastically, and this is impacting on our food import bill. Both advanced economies and also developing ones, we see an increase in inflation. Now, this is another blow. I think just this week, Malaysians, we were grumbling that even our bread prices are now gone up. So the inflation is very, very significant. And it's a great blow when people have lost incomes, have lost jobs, and they are suffering. And due to this problems of capitalism itself, as an economic system, it is further burdening the people with increasing costs. The other issue that I say on capitalism is why it is self-defeating, is where it has a system of just-in-time production. Just because the nature of capitalism itself, where it wants to cut corners at all possible areas, it wants to save costs, it wants to maximize profits. So in this system, as we know, is that in a time-based competition, so inventories are generally reduced to a minimum to decrease costs. Now, these production structures are unable to meet demand in times of crisis. So that is a problem that we find here. I think like we know companies like Toyota and all that, of course, those are cars, but even though it has also affected our necessary items. So goods that are urgently needed to fight the pandemic, such as PPE, oxygen cylinders, and other medical products are unable to be produced fast enough to meet the sudden rise in demand. So this is another failure in the system itself. So although capitalism has the production capacity to produce more than our needs, we always talk about this, this is the time, the era of mankind, where capitalism, we're able to produce, the production is so good, more than what mankind actually needs. But in times of crisis, because of this just-in-time system model of production that it has, it self-defeats itself, it inhibits itself to realize its full capacity. Just when the world needs vital equipments and consumables to save lives, capitalism once again has failed mankind. And this, of course, it goes on to other issues, even in terms of the consumerist culture the capitalists have created in terms of tourism and all that, which were also very much affected. And here, I think it's very important for us, comrades, as socialists, we should question and we should put all of these matters into questions. When proponents of capitalism usually put capitalism as a perfect economic system, putting it up in a high pedestal, supposedly this is an all-providing system, but here obviously it has failed to serve its purpose. We find that actually what saved the day was not selfishness, but actually what saved the day was solidarity actions, sharing of resources, and community mobilizations. So as what Adam Smith usually asserts to say that the system works best because of individual interests of all the supplier and the people buying it. But here that theory lays challenged because actually what saved the day was solidarity actions by people working together. I like to further talk about market failures on how it is also was very blatant during this crisis. If you look at the crisis of 2008-2009, of course, the subprime crisis in the US was a result of over-financialization of the market, and it was warned many times to Alan Greenspan and so on people. So it was predicted, but no one took heed of it. But unlike COVID, it was very sudden and it was very hard-hitting. So there was no warning for COVID. So that's why the WTO estimates that through this economic fallout, drop in annual trade, in the most optimistic, it would have dropped 13% in the year 2020. The most pessimistic would have been 32%. I think it would have been worse in 2021, what we have seen today. Now, this is actually, we can say that what we suffered in 1 year is equivalent to 3 years of what happened during the Great Depression in 1930s. So we can see that the market cannot deal with an outbreak of contagious disease like this. The market isn't built to handle such externalities of this nature. We also find that whatever structures or protections that the market system also had to protect businesses also failed the same businesses it was supposed to protect. We find that the risk management, insurance companies shun covering losses of business suffering pandemics. They have insurance for business interruptions, but pandemics were not included. There are many court cases everywhere. People are suing the insurance companies because supposed to be covered, not to be covered, fine lines among the agreements and so on. And now also we find that especially businesses which were very badly impacted, like tourism and hotel industries. Now, post-pandemic, these are now regarded as high-risk industries. And they are also having problems because even banks are now reluctant to provide finance because they're considered high risk. So this is another problem with capitalism itself and how it sort of like defeats itself. It simply breaks down. It cannot handle a crisis like this. And we also know the nature of predatory capitalism, whereby it sort of feeds on smaller enterprises. And that's why it favors large corporations and eliminates small and medium enterprises. Because we know that the smaller enterprises, which don't have much cash flow, they were badly impacted and they cannot sustain, unlike the bigger corporations, which have much cash, much liquidity, and they were able to sustain during lockdowns. Comrades, the other issue is that we also find that when companies, they start to restart again, those businesses that survived, naturally, they will be wanting to look for customers. They want to bring back their customers to their shops and so on. So they will put on offer. So here we see that the rate of profits will see falling. That means there'll be competition among businesses to pull back customers to their shops and to their businesses. And here we find there will be a fall in the rate of profits. On top of that, even though there's a fall of profits, but there is no demand because people have lost jobs. A lot of people have been pushed to poverty. So here we find another crisis where there's a drop in aggregate demand. So here is where we find that even though businesses are able to resume, but they will take a long, long time to recover, if they recover in the first place, because of this problem that we have. The other thing capitalism will do itself is that it will lose its own human capital because of its nature, where it wants to cut costs, it wants to increase its profit margin. So obviously the cost that it cuts is its variable cost, which is labor. So what it does is that it will usually lay off the most experienced, of course, obviously being the highest paid of its workforce, would have been laid off during the COVID-19 period, and they would have been mainly replaced with cheaper labor force. And now, if they are able to continue businesses, the businesses struggle to bear the costs until the new staffs are able to generate the same level of productivity as the experienced staff. The other thing that we also see if how stock markets react to enterprises. You see, those enterprises, those businesses, those corporations which are responsible, which will not lay off workers, they want to keep their workers, they don't reorganize so quickly, they're trying to accommodate. But those businesses are usually punished by the stock market because the stock market and the market prefers firms with a lot of flexibility, ready to do mergers, ready to lay off people, close down departments, reorganize themselves. So responsible enterprises which are loyal to their employees, refusing to lay off workers, shut down departments, and reorganize their management quickly to cut losses, will be usually punished by the stock market. So here is another system where we find that how the capitalism itself, how it simply cannot operate under such circumstances. It is completely unfriendly in this kind of situations. If you look at the impacts, I think obviously we have also heard from Dr. Rini. I think one of the main impacts is that we've seen this COVID is how it has impacted the lowest paid workers. And that is, of course, a sad story. Now, even though the work from home was always promoted, but work from home does not work for everyone. While the executives could enjoy the comfort of working from home because they were basically IT workers and so on, and still draw their salaries, but it is the cleaners, the security guards, the store cashiers, and the delivery riders who had no choice but to continue working during this pandemic, and they were exposed to the virus. So beyond that also is that we also find that majority of them also lost their income, because if we look at production workers, naturally the factories would have had shutdowns, they would have reduced the number of working hours. So usually the factory workers, those on the production floor, they usually rely on the overtime because they are only paid the minimum wage. So the bulk of their income usually comes from overtime. And during these times when production was shut down, most of the overtime would have gone. And that is why the ILO cites that the lowest paid 50% of the workers would have lost an estimated 17.3% of their wages. So it's very obvious. So there's a double whammy here where they lose their incomes, they get exposed to the virus, and it's a horrible system. And as Oxfam reported, this has resulted in nearly 500 million people expected to be pushed into poverty by the economic fallout, and another 400 million jobs have already been lost. And it estimates another 430 million small enterprises are also at risk here. But the despicable thing here is that we cannot really tolerate is while COVID has seen a spread, it is not only the virus which has spread, but even billionaires have spread. Now, COVID-19 hasn't stopped the spread of billionaires who multiplied in an astounding rate over the past year. Here we're talking about the past year. A record of 493 people joined the Forbes World Billionaires list in the year 2021, meaning that the world on average gained a new billionaire every 17 hours. So today, tomorrow, we have a new billionaire. Imagine that. There's 500 million people who have been pushed into poverty, and here we find billionaires are increasing every day. And some are shooting off to the space, as we have seen. So what is the reaction? I like to put forward here two reactions from the capitalists. As what the World Economic Forum Executive Chairman said, Klaus Schwab, he says that the free market fundamentalism has eroded workers' rights and economic security, triggered a deregulatory race to the bottom, and ruined the tax competition and enabled emergence of a massive new global monopoly. Now, at a glance, if you read what he says here, it would seem that the WEF chief, maybe he's talking like a socialist, is in agreement that the capitalist system needs to be discarded. But no, here is where they sort of cover themselves. They quickly adds that, no, capitalism is not over yet. There's a new variant of capitalism. On Friday, we knew about a new variant in COVID, but here is talking about a new variant in capitalism. Supposedly should be more friendly and should be much better. So they say that here is where governments are going to tax and spend more. They will use regulatory powers to weaken monopolies and so on. But comrades and friends, I mean, haven't we heard of this story before? Haven't we been cheated of these things before? I think very too often we have been duped by these false solutions that these capitalists give us, or these proponents sort of tell us that there's always a reformed version of capitalism which is on the way, and they promise in return, they say that, oh, no, we will not do all of these things, we will not be so speculative, we regulate ourselves, we'll take care of ourselves, and please help us. In return for the government assistance in times of crisis, they promise that they will regulate themselves. I mean, capitalism is like a spoiled child that promises to abide by the rules of the mother and the father as long as they pull him or her out of trouble, only to return to their old ways when the economy is back to the pre-pandemic levels. And this we have seen even after the 2008 and 2009 crisis. But immediately after that crisis, a year later, we found that the bankers were paying hefty salaries back to their CEOs and shareholders. So we have heard this story before. And even as stated by Joe Stiglitz, here he lays out what other benefits the government should intervene. He says that in addition to fiscal stimulus package, there's a long list of things that the government can do. Ensuring full employment, including regulating externalities, promoting robust competition, guarding against exploitation, limiting market power, and so on. But the irony is all of these things are not in the textbook of capitalists. It's basically a contradiction to how capitalism itself works. The recommendations are in contradiction to capitalism's core nature. Thus, while it seeks the intervention to pull it out of the water, capital quickly will reassert itself, very quickly will reassert itself to return to its true and fettered self as soon as possible. It does not like all of these things. It just wants to tell us a lie so it can get some assistance and then it will go back. And unfortunately, we have politicians with very short memories, which will abide by the capitalist interests, and they will roll back all of these reforms that we are fighting for now. So we are fighting for social protection during COVID. But once capitalists, they are back in their boom days, they will fight, no, deregulate the labor laws, take away the social protections. We have to go for free market and so on. So this is what happens. And unfortunately, we vote for this kind of politicians who do not realize what has happened during the crisis, and they will abide by the corporation's interests. So comrades, so what is the task for us? I think for us, we need to continuously expose the inconsistencies of the vulnerable and unsustainable economic system. We should keep educating the masses. I know now all of us, we are fighting for a lot of mitigating measures. We're asking the government to do this, do that, give loans to small businesses, help out the people and all that. But this should not absolve capitalism as its problems are fundamental and systemic. This does not mean that capitalism works. No. We should tell all these people that these are mitigating factors, that the government is intervening, but capitalism as an economic system has failed, has always failed, and we need to fight for a new economic system. The crisis is the best opportunity where we have to discuss, we have to brainstorm for a new economic system. It is not a time where we find mitigating measures so that we can carry on in the same way, business as usual. We have to tell people that what actually saved us during this time of pandemic was solidarity actions, sharing among us, looking out for one another, and not what capitalism is promoting, which is selfishness, individualism, and aspirations to accumulate wealth and prosper. This is not what is saving us, will save mankind. And we need to keep a watchful eye on what is actually happening, because we as left, we are always very active when the times of crisis, when we find people losing their jobs, when we find people being pushed into poverty and so on. So we're aggressively doing protests, we are fighting for campaigns, we're fighting for benefits and so on. But in times of calm and in times of economic boom, we should also make sure that the capitalists quietly do not roll back all of these reforms that we have fought so hard. And that is very, very important. So comrades, I think it's very, very important for us to continue fighting this capitalist system. And we take this opportunity to show that this system simply cannot be repaired. We need to look, we need to think, we need to work together to form a new economic system. And this is the best time to do it. Thank you very much. And we will discuss more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Sivarajan. Thank you both Karene and Sivarajan for exposing all this at this point, at this juncture, what the governments and the global institutions are saying, that we are going to be doing this, we are going to be doing that, and yet we are looking to a quick reasserting of themselves, and even right now of big corporations and numbers of billionaires coming into the fold of Forbes magazine. So we see that yes, there are a lot of tasks that we need to do, and we will come to that soon during the open forum to discuss further about those ways that we can address how they are trying to confuse us and trying to give us false solutions. So now we go to Lek, our third panelist. So Lek, can you give us your talk?
Hello.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, is it possible? Yeah, is it possible to make it full screen? Your slides?
Yes. Wait a minute. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. And hi everyone. Like is my nickname. Actually, my first name is Pachani Kamnak. Today, okay, my topic is about the capitalism can't save the people. So everybody knows about the. I realized that the participants here know about the capitalist framework, and the two speakers before me explained very well about the characteristics of the capitalism. And I would like to present the key issues, and I would like you to see the micro level in Thailand. So it's about the case of Thailand. And the key issue is one is about the abnormal capitalist system. Number two is ruling class oppressions. And three is building a socialist platform as a solution. So abnormal capitalist systems. Yeah, I would like to focus again about the characteristics of the capitalist development. Even the two speakers already talked about this, but this is like the introductions so that I can lead you to the Thailand case. The characteristics of the capitalist development in Thailand, as maybe you may know about the Thailand, that is the capital receiving countries. And it's also the middle income trap country as well, and it's the developing countries but uncivilized politics. And also even 20 years past, our livelihoods a bit better. So because it's the profit-driven capitalist is exploits the workers by using cheap labor and precarious work in many industries. You can see that in industrializations, especially in Thailand, that we have still have cheap labor. But the technocrats said that we are in the middle income trap. But actually, mostly we are living in the cheap wage and precarious work. 20 years ago, that the Thai government has implemented in policy of the privatizations, so that from that time we had like a subcontract, short-term contract workers. And second is it invests the wildlife ecosystem, that human wildlife conflicts have become more frequent, and that this paved the way for virus to spill over to human as COVID-19. And it's a top-down development. It's invade natural resources, as you know, and also the local people's land. And it stimulates people to consume almost all the times. And so it becomes like a overproduction. And the last one is controls people and build a discourse to sustain the system. It means that the capitalism try to deceive us and brainwash us. So the consequences of the capitalist developments, as you know, in Thailand, that everywhere in this world that capitalists creates inequality. So especially in Thailand, that Credit Suisse estimate that the richest 10% of Thailand owns more than 77% of the nation's assets, and the proportion of assets held by the richest 1% increased between 2008 and 2018. Yeah, this is like a fact. And capitalism created a reserve army of the unemployed, crisis, and conflict. As you know, that we are during the political conflicts too. And the past crisis, that 20 years later, or 30 years later, because I experienced myself in the economic crisis in Tom Yam Kung crisis in 1997. I experienced that at that time because I was in this undergraduate, and I was hired by the precarious work because I got my work got the fund from the Japan. The crisis in 1998 and 2008 that the capitalist restructures the productions in order to survive, but exploit workers and lay off them without compensation. And it also built a discard of business partners that can weaken the labor force. So business partner is still prevailing in Thailand. Business partner like a platform, digital platform. The employer took advantage of the reserve army of unemployed people in recruiting people to work and define employment conditions. Yeah, reserve army, that still happen today. And capitalist restructures production by changing employment to be more precarious, like subcontracting and outsourcing. It began in 1997 and more in 2008. So this is, for example, that in the case of Thailand, we are facing current multiple crises, like political conflict that the young people and other people movement, we demand the government, demand the monarchy to reform themselves. And yeah, but it's not successful, of course. And yeah, and the total cases of the infected patients by COVID-19 is about 2 million, and 1% died. And the GDP growth in Thailand is contracted to 6.1. Wait a minute. So, but during we are facing the fourth wave of the COVID outbreak, and especially it began in July, and at that time, it's like people die a lot, and hospitals were overwhelmed, and the mortality rate jumped to 1% in July. That shocked us a lot, and the health system and in the hospitals, that failed to accommodate the patients infected. This is quite terrible. Oops, what happened? Ouch. Okay. And after that, the pandemic and the economic situations, that we also suffer from lockdown measures of the government, and workers have paid the higher price for the lockdown and emergency decree in order to contain COVID-19, especially the Delta variant. The Delta variant came to Thailand in June, July, so that caused the people die. And and the grievance relief measures is not sufficient at all. And so the economy in the fourth quarter of last year, and GDP contracted by 6.1, that, as I have said, and it's lowest, is the lowest in 22 years since the Tom Yam Goong crisis in 1997. And the public debt level was a little less than 42% of the GDP. As the speaker before me that talked about the huge, that is the fact that we in Thailand, the governments built a lot of debt. That's for, but now it's going to 60% of the GDP this year. Is going to, because the government is planning to borrow money to create the loan, and and at the end of at the end of February of this year was already 53.5% of GDP. That means that it's 10% rise in GDP debt. It's just only 1 year. And household debt is very terrible as well. Not only public debt, the household debt ratio to GDP is almost 90%. In the second quarter of this year, and that is quite highest rate. That at least for 18 years in the previous quarters, and the amount of the household debt about 14 trillion baht at the end of June of this year. So the household debt ratio, this is last year, that in 2020, that the household debt ratio is about 89%. So it's about 89% this year too. And the massive employment now, for example, in Thailand is about the unemployed is about 758,000 in this year, and 2 million people unemployed. So we are facing underemployed and unemployed problems. And insecure tourism and manufacturing sector as high employment, but it's but the people from the service sector, they lose job. A lot of workers in the service sector lose job because the service sector in Thailand is the biggest sector, and the workforce is about 20 million of the total labor force, or 50% of the labor force. So that's me. So a lot of problems happen, and the market mechanisms fail for workers and common people to buy basic needs. We cannot, the jobless people cannot buy basic needs because the cost of living is still a bit higher now. Yeah, so they have the gap between the billionaire and billionaire, not millionaire, but billionaire and the poor, because in Thailand we have some billionaires, about 10 billionaires, especially the monarchy. The king was is doing business as well, and he had a lot of money, that about 30 billion US dollars. So, and we are facing the ruling class oppressions that the government, the current government was from the military coup in 2017, and they still have in power, and then they make the constitution of 2017, 2017. So they quite they can dominate the existing economic system and justice system as well. So the whole body of the Thai state are in control of the militaries and the elites. Yeah, a lot of happens, that especially the human rights violations, and especially during amidst COVID-19, we are still in the emergency decree, and we cannot go out to protest or assemble for more than 50 people. 50. It's the law is not does not allow us to assemble. Sometimes 20, sometimes 5, but now 50 people. So if you go to protest, you can be prosecuted by the police. And this is the problem, because unions cannot, they don't go out to protest. You can see that trade unions movement in Thailand quite just only submit the letter at the Ministry of Labor. So, but they don't go on the street and a protest, like a young movement. So, and they don't have and the Ministry of Labor also does not allow the trade unions to have the member congress or strike back to the employers as well. So how the last topic is how to build the socialist platform as a solution. We are trying how to prevent the massive dismissal and unemployment. So we need the government. We need the new government to intervene the massive dismissal. But so we have to build a bigger movement to do that, to push the government to do that. And we should have the people movement should have the policy to restore the state enterprises business, or the public activity, public service, and essential works by the government. So it means that the government should invest in the public service and hire employ the worker. So, and we also have to build the democracy at work and build a common experience. Because in Thailand, you know that among the young people and the people movement, many of them maybe not have they don't have the common experience on the in the capitalist system, because when they analyze the problems, the conflicts, it's not in the under the paradigm of the capitalism. It's just only the analyze the framework of the authoritarianism, monarchy, something like that. But it's not put. But this analysis is not put into the capitalist framework. So we need them to consider more in the bigger perspective, wider perspective as the capitalism. So they can see that the capitalism is the big framework, and let's move forward to do something with the system. And after that, we can campaign for the right to work, because according to the unemployment, that massive unemployment and underemployment, you know, that the people are left behind. And so how to fix this problem? So we need the people to know, especially the movement, to know the right to work, because everyone cannot be left behind, and they have to be supported by the government to work. So it's like it's the fundamental human rights that we should promote this kind of rights. And wage increase. The wage increase in time of crisis is reasonable, but the general people might think that it's not reasonable. So we need to debate with them that the wage increase is very reasonable in this time. And because we can look at the past, that we can see that the wage increase does not cause the people to lose their job and reduce work. People work, yeah, even we have like wage increase, but and both public and private employers take advantage of high unemployment. They freeze wages and employ workers with short-term contracts and subcontracts. So we need the people. It's our role to make the people understand the short-term contract and subcontract employments as well, so that we can fight back the private and the public employers, because the young people, when they graduate, you know that, and now the graduates are still jobless. They cannot find work. It's about 500,000. So the new graduates still finding their work, and we should educate them to know about the precarious work, so that they can join us to promote the right to work, wage increase, and job security. Yeah, and now we are always face the domination of the labor market by the capitalists. So how to fight back that? How can we have a power bargaining power about the labor on the labor market, to pressure the employers and the government to keep and increase employer standards. Yes, so now we are trying to radicalize the people's politics. We are campaigning the to build the universal social welfare for years already, for years. So now a lot of people talk about how to build universal social welfare, and but the raising tax on the rich is not a strong issue yet. So we need the people need to debate with the people on the raising tax on the rich. And of course that the people they experience inequality and racism. So it's the opportunity for us to talk about the equality, universal social equality, and health issue, for example, and education. In a lot of issues that the people should access to the equal public service, and a lot of things that we are trying to debate and put the progressive idea into discussions, online or offline seminars. And the important thing is that we should organize the workers unions that are quite more more radicals from the past, more radical than the past. That is the important that organizing is help us in campaigning and help us in debating with the people. So we have come to the point that someone is dying in front of our house and our front door. So do we care or not? This is a situation in Thailand that unfortunately that you are a member of your family may die amidst COVID-19. So we should care about that. And if we choose not to learn the lessons from the capitalist pandemic that is right before our eyes, the consequences will be dire. So we have to make the people to perceive this, to address these of problems into public, and try to make the people perceive this in the same level as us, as ours. So it's quite you have to work hard on the discussions and organizing that, so that we can prove that we have the commitment to doing this, to find the solutions and to make the people understand with us about the abnormal capitalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Lek.
How to?
Okay, so there are many questions that were posted on the Q&A box, and I would just want really to go directly to them, so that we can have a very, very engaged and very interesting discussion and deepening of what our comrades in the panel have shared with us. I think the questions may be categorized into some would be thrown on further clarifying the current crisis. Some would be questions on how then do we move forward in a transition to using the socialist solutions, socialist ways. And there are also questions on how do we look at and bring in lessons or what we see in countries that have put in more socialist systems that have more socialist systems in place, what are the lessons there that we can also use in our own countries here in Southeast Asia? I would just like to start first with, I think it's very easy clarificatory question that was posed to Lek. Where is that? It's actually asking, well, there was a question posted here, but I can't understand it because it's in Thai. Yuki put it there. Maybe I'm going to ask Yuki later to post that question. But the clarificatory question, or in addition to what you have already shared with us, Lek is where is that, Lek?
Yes.
I'm looking for it. Wait a minute. Give me a sec. Yeah, here. From Louis van Werle, sorry if I mispronounce it. What is the percentage of Thai adults who had been fully vaccinated? And do you think the figures provided by the government are correct in regard infections and deaths? And do those in the tourism industries, the small, medium enterprises, and the jobless get help from the government under its budget for the last 24 months? So it's just in addition, additional information. So very quickly, before we move on to the deeper questions. So Lek, would you have information on this?
Sorry again.
What do you think? Yes. What do you think is the percentage of adults who have been vaccinated in Thailand?
Okay.
And do you think the figures given by government, your government, are correct?
Yes, I think it's yeah, I trust the number of the government because because it's low. It's low number. Only about 50% of the populations got 2 doses of vaccines, and it's still not as planned. It's not. It should be, actually it should have been 70% as planned. So, but it's only maybe, I think, 50%, just half of the populations. Yeah.
So, well, Philippines is much lower, like at around 1/3 of the population. Anyway, there's the other question asked here is that would you have where's this? It's asking about the small and medium enterprises, and if they have been given help from the government in the past 24 months.
In the past 24 months, so
meaning in the 2 years, right? Past under COVID.
So what is the questions about that?
Well, just asking for information. So I just wanted to put that away quickly because these are clarificatory questions, no? So did the government give help to your small enterprises, to the small ones?
Yeah, that is like a small loan.
Oh, just loan. So
just loan, yeah, but with a very small interest. But it's not enough. It's very small loan, and many SME are collapse, bankrupts, especially the SME in the nighttime business, night business, so they quite collapse. It's bankrupt. Yeah, it's quite horrible.
Okay. So thank you for that, Lek. Now we go directly to questions regarding how do we go about finding solutions, our solutions in our socialist ways forward. And one of them would be about just transition when it looks at the problem of going green. This is a question from Jaya Kumar. He's asking, one of the problems with going green is that we now have probably a chance to go green, trying to find the opportunity in all this crisis and pandemic. But its problem is that it will increase production costs and make the country less competitive in the global economy. For example, if Malaysia pushes for electrical trucks, the cost of transport will go up and the prices of the goods that we will export will go up, and we will lose out to Thailand. Malaysia will lose out to Thailand and Vietnam. So for our national planners, they will hold back. The race to the bottom that ASEAN countries are engaged in affects us. How do we handle this? So maybe I will throw these questions to first to Karene and then to Sivarajan. Karene, are you still there?
Okay.
This is one of the dilemmas that we have. How do we go about this?
Yes. Managing the transition is really a very challenging one. And right now, there's a big debate in the ADB, World Bank, IMF, and big business circles on how to manage transition. But the transition that they're talking is more from the perspective of big capital. And that's why in the case of ADB, there's a lot of hesitancy I mentioned, because if you know, ADB is funded by the Japanese, and the ADB has funded many of these coal plants. The same with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank of China. But we are talking here of a transition from the perspective of the people, from the perspective of the grassroots. And and they're not necessarily the same. Maybe there are some overlaps, but very often they're different. And sometimes efforts to go green can become efforts to amass more profits. So, and that's why you have a slogan, you have this observation, green economy can be a greed economy. And that's why it's very important for people to be alert. And it's very important that the greening process is managed and under the direction of the organized people. Which brings me to the issue of, do we have a green perspective in the ranks of the trade unions, the farmers' organization, and so on? So this is something we have to master. And that's why I think, Raquel, you are a participant in some of our meetings that we said that greening should start at the community of the poor, and then we transform the community of the poor into, you have COVID proofing, meaning investment on health and so on, but you also have climate proofing in terms of retrofitting, developing needed items. Now, if you talk of greening and you are losing competitiveness, that's a different issue. You see, you cannot transform economy into a green economy overnight. And that's why we need to ask our policymakers, our government, where is the blueprint? Where are the plan? And all countries in Asia, they're supposed to be under the Paris Agreement to have this NDC, nationally determined commitments. But many of the commitments of the Asian countries fall far below what is needed to fulfill the goals of Paris Agreement 2015. And in some countries like the Philippines, they make it even contingent on the availability of foreign funds. And if foreign funds come in, most likely they will, of course, focus on what is good for them. Like our Department of Finance is already lining up coal power plants that will be some kind of they will sell this to be financed by this global climate finance. But how they will do it and how they will transform, you can already ask questions on that this is not necessarily good for the people. So what I'm saying, in short, greening is a big battlefield for all of us, and the socialist movement should have a very clear green development blueprint. The question about competitiveness is a difficult issue raised by our friend from Malaysia, but again, we have to address that, and you have to relate it to the issue of shall we maintain this old system of pitting country against country in terms of comparative advantage, rebuild comparative advantage, competitive advantage, because you need to attract investment. Can we have a different development framework? Unfortunately, it's nice to discuss this, but it's difficult. But the main thing is, what a socialist in Asia, what exactly is our green development vision, our green development blueprint? How do we pursue it country by country? How do we forge alliance and solidarity with other social movements across Asia and across the world? Many things to be done, but that is really the way forward, because greening requires a real, honest to goodness, people-centered greening requires, I'm sorry to say, overhaul of existing economic structures that we have in countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karene. I changed my mind, Sivarajan. I want to ask you another question that more related, I think, to your presentation. Or where did it go? Okay. Okay. So it's quite a provocative question, because you were talking about, right now they're talking about what's this, reinvented capitalism again, and countries, governments doing reforms, but then you saying that quickly these things quickly revert back after the crisis. There's a question here: should socialists reject all attempts to reform the capitalist system and just focus on making the transition to socialism? People are in severe stress now, and socialist transformation is still several decades away. Or should we support the reforms that mobilize the working people, build the movement, develop awareness among the people, create broad coalitions, etc., etc., and not participate in reform efforts that demobilize people and facilitate the myth that we do not need to go beyond capitalism in the long term? So
Yeah, I think when I also presented that, I made it clear is that we ourselves in PSM, that we are, even now since the COVID started, we are heavily involved in campaigns to demand the government to make sure that they increase social protection, help out people who are being pushed into poverty, stop evicting people from their housing. So there's many issues that we are involved in. I think we cannot isolate ourselves and say that, yeah, all of these problems are caused by capitalism. And one day when socialism is here, everything will be solved. And so let us sit back and wait for it. I think obviously not. What I'm saying is that we should, while we mitigate and while we campaign for these things, we should also do it parallelly with the education process to say that, look, in fact, this is the best time, as usually it's during the times of struggle that you can conscientize the masses very quickly. And we should show them, why are we having this crisis? If you had a good social protection, would you been suffering this crisis? And in fact, it was very evident in Malaysia itself, because for us, PSM and other mobilizing groups and the masses that we mobilize, we have been doing campaigns against the privatizations of hospitals for a very long time, more than 15 over years. When the government really wanted to privatize the hospital, the government services, adding on a private wing to the private hospital. So every time when we talked about this, the people did not really realize the pinch of it, the problems that it could be happening, because everything was okay. But at the times of pandemic, then people really saw that how, for the first time in their lives, they were able to see how the ICU beds were fully taken up. They could see visuals of people lying on the floor because there was not enough beds. They could see doctors going on strike because there's not enough specialists, because through this liberalization and neoliberal policies of the 1990s, which we've been voicing it out, most of the specialist doctors have left the government service to the private sector. And now there's a lack of specialist doctors in the government hospital. So all of these things could be seen. So I think it is very important for us to be continuously involved in this struggle, to expose the systems at any one point in time that we can. And it is, in fact, the best time. But we have to educate them and to say that, look, all of these things are happening because of the neoliberal policies, because the government never bothered to give you social protection. Even in Malaysia, what the government has done is that supposedly to help the people, it has asked people that you can withdraw from your retirement savings. So while people were waiting for funds from the government directly, it has asked people to say that, no, you just dig into your retirement savings. There's so many schemes facilitated by the government today to say that, no, okay, we cannot give you cash, but you just put your hand inside your retirement savings. So what is going to happen when they retire? Because they already used up the money to pay for their costs during COVID times. So I think it is very important for socialists to do both of this work, to get involved in the local struggle, to demand the government for changes now, and at the same time educate the public is that we cannot no longer carry on with this kind of economic system, which is a crisis and which will push us into further down into crisis every time there's a economic crisis or there's a pandemic. Every time there's a pandemic is going to come up, we will going to suffer again unless we make a serious change to this economic system. We really put up the fight to this economic system. I think that is the challenge for the socialists today, to do both of the work, to campaign and to educate the masses that this system simply is not working.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so now I transition to, we have barely 10 minutes in this left in this open forum, unless organizers give us a little bit more, a few more minutes. But then I want to now go into questions on lessons from other socialist countries and how, how we compare how they have handled the multiple crises now compared to the capitalist countries. There are two questions here that are related. Sufyan is wondering, I am just wondering, while capitalism did fail tremendously during COVID, how would things be different in socialist economic setting? And related to this, there's also the question from Aruchelvan Subramaniams asking, well, commenting first that you panelists have painted such a grim, bleak picture. But then the question is posed, didn't COVID give the opportunity for the public sector to play a bigger role compared to the private sector, at least in the healthcare? And it was said that socialist countries handled the pandemic better than the capitalist countries. So from here, what could be the gains and opportunities created by COVID, and what good opportunities the socialists could socialists gain during this pandemic? So those two related questions. So would you care to try a response to this, Lek? And then I'll go to Karene and also Sivarajan. Lek,
Yes.
would you care to respond?
The socialist solutions.
So again, like they're saying that socialist countries, the information and data we're getting from them is that they're been handling especially the COVID, the pandemic crisis much better than capitalist countries. So is there a lesson there, or are there things there that socialists can piece out and use for our own solutions?
Yes, and as I have said that we are trying to make the socialist make a platform that the people before profit, and but the socialist ideas in Thailand is not. We are quite struggling to put the socialist idea into public, and a lot of young people now are interested in socialist idea because revolutions. We need revolutions in Thailand. Because we had very bad bodies of state and economic systems. So I think so. We try to talk about we don't support the idea of the reform because it's not enough, and we had a lot of reforms perspective in the past, but it still be here is still bad at present because of reform perspective. So we need try to change the system, and I think and hope that people we have to build the socialist organization or leftist organizations among the young people, young generation, and we need to make them to understand that the poverty is inherited from generation to generations, and that generations gonna be in troubles because of poverty.
So you would say that one of the opportunities that you were able to capitalize on was that more of the youth were now what agitated and pushed to actually do actions, protest actions because of this situation, no?
The experience, and the workers, it's quite hopeless for the old-fashioned traditional housing unions, is because they cannot translate experience on a capitalist crisis to the young people, young workers. So it's like generations among the workers, that they should have the same experience, but actually not.
Thank you, Lek. Karene, would you like to weigh in on this?
Okay, I hope to be short.
Yes,
first
please.
of all, the pandemic shows that importance of the public sector. In a pandemic, it's very clear that it is the government, the state is in the best position to address a pandemic, and that's and those economies that rely too much on the private sector will have difficulties, and that's what really happened. Countries with a broken health sector like the Philippines, and because of privatization, because of commodification of health service and so on, had a very difficult time addressing. And up to now, you see the corruption and the scandals that attended the management of COVID in the Philippines shows to you how bad was the impact of neoliberal privatization inspired program. On the other hand, countries with very strong public sector, as well as with a very strong community-based health system, are able to manage the pandemic better. And to a certain extent, you have Vietnam, you have South Korea, you have New Zealand, of course, China, whether it's because of the Communist Party or what, but they have a system at the community level. And in the Philippines and a number of other countries where the community approach work is because the people are united and strong at the community level. And that's why, and this is in line with the very old declaration of the World Health Organization. The way forward to achieve universal health is to have to build a strong community-based health system and transform the health for one and health for all, and then and transform the health system at the community level as the center, not only of wellness for the community, but also of economic and so on. To a certain extent, that's what Cuba has been trying to do and showing to the world. I think in the case, I can imagine in the case of Bolivia, where the group of Evo Morales was able to come back, is because of this emphasis on the community. And community unity and wellness is related to what I've been saying, the importance of people's solidarity. That's where we saw the importance of organized women, organized youth, and then unity on what can be done at the community level. That and that's but the solidarity should be cascaded up, meaning at the larger regional level and across Asia. And that's why in my presentation, I put solidarity as one important solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Karane. Sivarajan, I would really love to hear your response to this, although we have very little time left now.
Yeah, just shortly, I think what would socialists would have done different, as we know that when the COVID came, everyone says that the rich and poor were all in the same boat because COVID affected everyone, but not necessarily. If socialists, we were there, what would be different is that we would have stressed on the basic necessities of the people, that in times of either a climate crisis or in times of a pandemic, people would have fared well, much better. I mean, the basic things, I think in terms of wages, we should have given them proper wages. With wages, they would have at least have some kind of savings that even though they lose their jobs, they would have been able to survive until they're able to get a new income. So that's very important. Wages, what kind of wages socialists would have fought for and would have implemented? They would have raised the minimum wage. The other thing is also on the importance for food security. We have seen that during the COVID, when borders were closed, if your country, you relied on food imports, and then your food imports were cut, and then there's a high cost to it, what would have happened? So what happened to food sovereignty here? we should have relied. If you look at Malaysia, majority of the land is being used for commodity crops, not for food crops. So where is the land for food production? So here is again that the socialists would have done things much better, preparing people for the worst. The other thing is also in terms of social protection. If you lose jobs, do you have an insurance? Do you will have a pension to survive? How in terms of other costs of a livelihood, in terms of education, do you have a proper social protection? I think this is very important. And PSM, I think we were able to get involved in a campaign to make sure that at least we people have an employment insurance scheme. This is a campaign that we have been doing for a very long time. And when the COVID struck, at least this scheme was in place to help out people. Housing is a big thing. How can you talk about social distancing when the poor people are living in the cramped up housing? Most of the poor people in Malaysia are living in pigeonholes, 650 square feet, a family of 5, and you ask them to do social distancing. No. And most of the cases we find in this kind of highly dense populations where there's actually no way that you can do social distancing. So if you really provided proper housing for people, something which is affordable and it's comfortable and there's more rooms and everything, so this would have been possible. And the last, I think, as many have stated, healthcare. If the government, a socialist government, pays more attention to public healthcare, build more hospitals, and not just let the private sector be a so-called public-private partnership to provide healthcare to the people. And until today, even in Malaysia, we find is that even after a year when COVID has struck, the private sector is still so reluctant to take in COVID cases. They're giving all kinds of excuses. And the whole burden, the public hospitals were overflowing here in most of the bigger cities in Malaysia. And even after a year, they keep giving the same excuses. So I think this is where the socialists would have done something different, where we would have at least taken care of the base necessities of the people. I think if you talk about examples, Cuba is one example, a country under sanctions, under embargo, under so much of economic stress, and yet they were able to put the money where it's properly needed to develop healthcare, to develop their vaccines. And that has proven not only beneficial to them, but throughout the world, where they were sending the medical brigades, the doctors were going throughout the world to help out. So here is where the socialists have a completely different perspective of development, where they put the model, where they put the money, where it's actually needed. And even if you look at examples in Kerala, those were the states which benefited or they fared well during the pandemic in India, Kerala under the CPIM. The healthcare was fully mobilized. They were able to supply the people with food, with oxygen tanks. So there's a very clear difference here that we can find that how socialists would have handled these issues much better. And that is why that while we campaign for these measures, we need to again and again tell that this capitalist model cannot go on any longer, because the next crisis will be a climate crisis. There'll be a lot of migration happening. There'll be a lot of climate refugees happening. And what are we going to do? So this is a catastrophe which is coming, and we really need to seriously move on to a new economic system, because mankind will not survive more crises like this. Thanks.
Thank you, Sivarajan. Our organizers have kindly given us, with your indulgence, of course, the participants, they have kindly given us about 6-7 minutes additional, because we did start late for a few minutes. So I want to throw this last question. Well, a set of questions, but interrelated. So it's basically asking, somebody asking, Najib asking, we look at she's looking at author Yuval Noah Harari's term socialism buffet, meaning in our ways forward, in strategizing for our ways forward, is it that countries select aspects of socialism instead of fully embracing the whole of what we mean by socialism and its principles. So she's saying that nowadays it seems that most countries pick some components while neglect others, especially on, for example, human rights, giving mixed signals to people and allowing also room for such things as corruption and misconduct. So how do we go about this in our own countries in Southeast Asia? Or what are your thoughts on this? And especially also if we relate it also to human rights, how do we then compare? How would we do it in a socialist system? How we push for this economic socialist economy that we want to be in place, that when in fact we are faced with a lot of repression, a lot of authoritarian regimes and governments that are also violating human rights. So even in the capitalist mode, you have this. In the socialist way of doing things, how would this play out in our effort to put in place a socialist economy? So I would throw this first to Karene.
Oh. I think that question deserves another conference. But you see,
Yeah.
but very briefly, there's no substitute for concrete analysis of concrete situation. But socialism here comes as that is your development framework perspective, and that's, therefore you should be very clear what is a socialist perspective. It is our looking glass. How do we look at things? What side are you on? What's benefit? So it is very different from the capitalist framework, more so with the neoliberal framework. And so I would really suggest that through forum like this, let us deepen our understanding of the socialist perspective. You see, when the group of Lenin won in 1917 in the Great October Socialist Revolution, the big issue there was how to build socialism, and so the issue of building a so-called a communist paradise came into the picture, and they just realized, and Lenin realized it's impossible. And then this so-called concept of from each according to his ability to each according to his need was transformed from each according to his ability to each according to his work. And so you have this issue of transition. But even in the case of Mao and of course Lenin, they have these transition issues, and I think some of the issues there were unresolved, and that explained why the weaknesses later on of the system that they built. But that's why if we have this so-called transition, climate transition, now that we are trying to build a different society from what we have now, the more we should be pay more attention to this clarifying what is this transition, and clarifying what exactly do we mean by a socialist perspective. I urge that our colleagues and our comrades put a little more effort on this, because this is very important. Again, there's no substitute for concrete analysis of concrete situation and coming up with concrete solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Karene. Lek, would you like to weigh in a bit on this briefly?
Yes, what we have done, what we are doing is try to radicalize the labor organizations and unionization in different sector, in the public sector and also private sector. So we need the people to think more about the labor organizing in Thailand, not only the young people, not relying on only young movement, right? And we are trying, it's like a building platform of unionization, and also socialist idea should be should be there to convince the people to be more radical and think about the revolutions, and the capitalism should be like a perspective for the movement so that we can work together and think more what should be done, what we should do, and we are keeping trying to continue to build to campaign for the welfare state establishment in Thailand. And a lot of things to do is that, but the important is socialist organizing.
Thank you, Lek. So Sivarajan,
Yes, on
yeah.
the question of Nadia, why do socialist countries, they pick and choose the models? I think also is because they start off in different situations. Not all countries they have the same level of production established. Some countries are more rural. Some countries have already established a certain level of production capacity, technology, and so on. So that is why I think they will pick and choose. Like there's no one size that fits for all. But yet again, we also see, I think that's what happened in China, that time was the main idea was that let's create the wealth first, and then we look at distribution. So that kind of perspective that some of the countries just choose. But I think what is the check and balance here is that we have to make sure whether there is people participation all the way along. We should look at this whole development of the socialist model. I would look at it in a triangle, a 3-point triangle, where one point is where there's a collective of people, councils who decide on what the society needs in a democratic way. And then another point of the triangle is whereby the same people are involved in that production collectively in the factory floors. And the third point of the triangle is whereby it is being collectively owned. So one, the people own the means of production. They are involved in the production process, and they are also the same people who, in a way of a collective people's council way, they decide on what is actually the society needs. So this is very, very conceptual. But anyway, we should always look at, are people always involved in all levels of deciding, in distribution, in deciding what is needed for the society, and sharing the wealth. So that is very important. And that is also a debate whether that is happening in China, whether we know that the Xi's administration, basically they overcome poverty. That's what they declared. But yes, but again, there's also a lot of disparity in China. So here's again, we have to ask, does people's power get involved? People, do they get involved in this whole process? So the last thing that I would like to say is that another check and balance that we should see is that whether countries which are embarking on socialism project, they have this dual way of doing it. While they immediately cannot destroy the capital mode of production, but are they developing the alternative models like what they do in Venezuela? Do they have workers control factories, which the government is assisting? They're trying to develop that production model. So are these things happening in parallel? Then at least we know that the countries are in a process. Socialism is a process towards developing a truly socialist production model. And once when we are able to overcome the capitalist mode of production. So I think these are some of the things that we have to think about and further discuss. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Siranavan. And I think our time is up, but there's still so many a number of questions here that we would have wanted to delve into, but I think that we can also take up again in the other sessions of this conference. For example, from Ed Tadam, he was asking about, well, picking up from what you were saying, Sivarajan, on countries coming from different levels of development when they pursued the socialist project. And Ed Tadim was asking about, well, there are those that insist that some countries are still semi-feudal stage, and thus socialism is not on the agenda, and therefore it is so-called national democratic transition built on alliance with national bourgeoisie that should be pursued rather than going straight for socialism. But then we have used up all our time for this session, and I guess that maybe we can revisit this these other questions in succeeding sessions where they may be relevant.